My name is Rick Curwin, and today we're going to be talking about motivation. How to motivate kids that feel hopeless, feel uninterested and uninvolved. How many of you have students who sometimes are uninterested, unmotivated, hopeless, and uninvolved? How many of you sometimes feel the same way yourself? Okay, great. Al and I decided that today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to allow each other to kind of comment as we go through. So as I'm talking, Al might have something to say. He's just going to bring it in, and I'm going to do that. I'd like to start today by first defining to you what I mean by motivation. Al might have a slightly different definition. You can add on later if you want. What I mean by motivation is very simply wanting to learn. Wanting to learn. This is very simple, but in what it leaves out gets a little bit more complex because it leaves out every form of strategy that doesn't leave children wanting to learn. So any form of threat might get children to actually perform, but it doesn't get them to want to. So threatening with punishment or consequences or anything hurtful to children is not motivating them. If you say to a child, if you don't do your homework, then I'm going to call your parents, and the kid does his homework, you still haven't motivated them. Likewise, any form of reward or privilege or opportunity that children get for doing things good is not motivation. Because they're not motivated to learn, they're motivated to get. Today we're going to look at motivation strictly as getting children to want to learn without having to reward them or punish them. And I'd like to get you started today with a little puzzle. And this puzzle is going to be kind of fun, and it's going to set the tone for the rest of the day. It's based upon two simple beliefs that I have. They are very different from the beliefs of almost everybody else in the world. The first belief is that teaching is one of the most difficult professions on earth. How many of you have ever heard this expression, anybody can be a teacher? Have you ever heard that? Have you ever heard that? You just heard it now? I find this very upsetting. So when people say that to me, I usually get pretty angry. A few months ago, somebody said to me, anybody can be a teacher. So I said, anybody can be a brain surgeon. What does that prove? He looked at me and said, do you think you could be a brain surgeon? I said, of course I could. I could be a brain surgeon. The patient's going to die, but I can do it. And that's the same with teaching. Anybody can stand up before a group of children and give information. But as most people do it, the patient is dying. Because teaching is not giving kids information. Teaching is having children learn it. And there's a big difference between giving information and having children learn it. My second belief is, one of the reasons that teaching is so difficult is that it's called a hidden harvest profession. And there's no way to tell when you're working in the job whether or not you're being successful at any moment in time. You cannot measure learning and you cannot measure teaching. They're unmeasurable. And when we try to figure out if we're doing a good job, there's no way to know. How many of you have ever had a student who you had trouble with for an entire year, a student who made you crazy, come back to you later and say you were his favorite teacher? Doesn't that happen all the time? It happens because you don't know what's going on the other side of the desk, because you can't measure it, which means teaching is done on faith. Since it can't be measured, we do it on faith. And faith gets tested. One of the reasons you go home sometimes at night just asking yourself, does anybody care what I do? Do any of my students even listen? Does it even matter if I show up tomorrow? It's because your faith is being tested because you can't see the results. For most children, the results of what you do today don't come to fruition until maybe 10 or 15 years later. So you can't see it, except in rare instances. How many of you work with special ed children of some type? You don't have, so you guys, you see immediate progress, and then the next day they're back to less than they were before. So it's like, yip, 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 yip. So it's doubly frustrating because you see the progress and then it dissipates on you. So in order to overcome this and to deal with some of these issues, one day you decide that you want to take up a hobby that's the opposite of teaching. It's outside, it's physical, it's concrete, and you always know where you stand. So what you decide is, you know what, I think I'd like to climb a mountain. That might be really fun. Has anybody in this room ever climbed a mountain? Now, I've been to Minnesota before, and I haven't seen very many mountains. Are there any mountains anywhere in Minnesota that I don't know about? There are? Where?
We have one that's 2,300 feet.
You have a 23. You mean you have a hill that's been named a mountain out of desperation? Right. Okay. You train for this for an entire year. You're very serious about climbing a mountain. You train for a year. You join a mountain climbing club. You buy professional equipment, and you really get good at it. And you're going to fly to either Colorado or Utah or possibly Seattle area, a place where there's world-class mountains to climb, and you're going to climb your mountain. And you pick the most difficult mountain you can find, you and your team, and you start your climb. And at first it's going very well. You're well trained, you know what you're doing, you have the right equipment, and you get up that mountain just the way you planned it and envisioned it. But approximately halfway up the mountain, you realize that the mountain you chose is more difficult than you thought. And as you look up at how treacherous it is up there and how difficult it is, you realize you are never going to get to the top. It's much too complicated, much too difficult, and you can't do it. You're tired, cold, you probably have a twisted ankle by now, and as you look up, you say, oh man, I'm just never going to make it. But with great perseverance and incredible effort, you actually get to the top. You do it. When you get there, you're overwhelmed with two very powerful feelings. The first feeling is a sense of relief. After we accomplish anything difficult in our life, we're accompanied by relief. Do you remember when you graduated from college? Wasn't part of that relief? Or when you get your first driver's license? But the biggest feeling and the overwhelming feeling is pride. I did it. One thing we're going to talk about today, either directly or indirectly, is how in education today we have made a terrible mistake. I think that everybody in this room knows that in order for a child to learn, they need to have a good self-concept. We all know that self-concept is critical to learning. But what we have done in America is think that you give somebody a self-concept by praising them and by telling them how good they are. But in truth, the only way to develop a good self-concept is to do something. It's a mistake to think you can tell a kid they're good. They have to overcome challenge. You feel best about yourself when you have a difficult challenge and you overcome it, not when someone tells you you can overcome it. So you feel very, very good to be at the top of that mountain because you did it. But as you look around the mountain, there are too many people up there. You can't imagine why there's so many people. There's elderly, there's babies in carriages. You didn't see any baby carriages climbing that mountain. There's people drinking cappuccinos, or whatever what do they call frappuccinos. I'm trying not to give a brand name here. Anyway, they're drinking coffee, and it's just, you can't imagine how this happened. So you start to investigate, and as you look around the mountain, you discover that someone had built an escalator up the other side of that mountain. And what amazes you is everyone who took the escalator accomplished the exact same goal that you did when you climbed it. The same exact goal was reached. You got to the top of the mountain. Well, you take the escalator down, and you're in the parking lot, and you come across a friend of yours. And this friend tells you that he or she is going to climb the same mountain that you just climbed. This is the puzzle. Would you tell him about the escalator? Why would you or why wouldn't you?